Recently, I was talking to a woman who had been raised by parents I know well. So I'm talking to this woman and I know her parents. So that kind of changes things. I know the background behind almost every word she's saying, in some cases better than she does. She said she could never remember having been happy. Now this is, after 30 something years. I'm pretty sure I've never been genuinely happy, she said. Now, it took her a while practicing, learning real love before she could say that, because she could see what happy people looked like. Prior to being introduced to real love, she didn't even know she hadn't been happy because, well, you're ignorant. If you've never seen a thing, how do you know that you haven't had a thing? How do you know how much ultraviolet radiation there is in the room if you can't see it? So as a teenager, she got a boyfriend and he was just living death. He was like living with a barrel of toxic waste. It was just really awful. She found real love, mostly accepted it, but still unhappy quite a bit. And she kept wondering why she tended to be so automatically defensive. Now, I don't mean to do this in a way that's alarming, but people who have PTSD, when there's a loud noise, they don't process the loud noise and then decide how to react to it. It's boom. It's a reflex. It's faster than their brain can process, much like a knee-jerk reflex happens when you tap the patellar tendon and your foot moves out before your brain knows your knee has been hit. And that's what people with PCSD do. They react that fast. Poof, they're defensive. And then later, even if they're acquainted with what PCSD is, later they say, oh, I guess I was kind of defensive, wasn't I? By a lot, yes. Now remember, I know her parents. She was strikingly ignorant of what her childhood had been like. Now, that may sound really strange. I understood her childhood way better than she did, not a little. And she was there for the whole thing, but actually not. Because picture, she's had PCSD from the time she was, we'll make it up, 1. And so she has spent her entire life. There's actually a test that they do when newborns are born, and I cannot now remember the name of the reflex. I think it's actually called the startle reflex. And they take a baby. It's a test of their neurologic condition, and they actually drop the baby, holding the baby. They drop the baby like 2 inches. It's not like they drop them on the ground and go, oh, wow, that was unfortunate. And the baby immediately throws their arms out, eyes open, and scream like you would expect somebody to do who'd been, say, stabbed. It's an automatic, normal neurologic reflex. Well, we react that way emotionally. This girl had spent her entire life in that kind of reflex. So startled, so defensive. Have you ever been completely frightened? They've done studies where they've, for example, had somebody act out a part and come in and commit a robbery, hold a room hostage. I'm not sure you could get away with doing some of these studies now. Scream fire, do things that completely frighten a room, and then individually interview every person in the room afterward. And let's say there are 30 people. They get 30 strikingly different accounts. They get people who actually, let's say there was one assailant who held a gun to the head of the teacher. They make up the number of people who came in the room. 4 men came in the room when it was 1. And he was tall. Wasn't tall at all. He was wearing black. It wasn't black. When we're afraid, we make stuff up, or just as commonly, we bury it. Bury it like way deep in the earth. She had buried her childhood. She had really pretty much no memories till she was, 15. She couldn't remember being happy. because, well, she never had been. And I said to her, I know your father. I know him well. He criticizes everything. This man criticizes noon. He's demeaning, he's condescending, he's angry, and he had to have treated you like that as a child. She said, I don't remember. I don't have any memory of him treating me like that. No, she wouldn't, for two reasons. One, it's the only thing she knew, so it wouldn't have stood out. And second, it was so awful, she buried it. I said to her, I don't need to hear a single story about your childhood because I know him. Because I've watched him do it with me. He didn't just do it with you. He does it with your mother. He does it with your siblings. He does it with me. I've watched him do it with other people on the phone. So I know, all caps, I know for a fact that he did that with you as a child. There's no doubt. There's no way that he was critical and condescending and demeaning with every single person on earth except for you. And even if he didn't do it all the time, which frankly he did because I watched him, he does it all the time with every breath. Let's say he didn't. You would have lived in mortal terror of the next assault. So it would have felt like all the time anyway. It's like being smacked in the head with a hammer only every 5 to 10 seconds. What would your memory be later? That you were hit in the head all the time? Well, if you were hit in the head enough times, I suppose you wouldn't have any memory of it at all, which is really not a bad comparison to PCSD. In war, it's not uncommon at all for men to have gotten severe PTSD, even though they were never shot, never wounded, and never saw a buddy next to them blown up. One common cause was just an artillery barrage with the constant whistling and explosion of artillery shells for days. The movies can't begin to do justice to the noise of battle. Can't even touch it. You'll watch people in a room and they'll shoot an assault rifle or they'll shoot a 9mm pistol, which is nothing compared to an assault rifle. My kids, when they were younger, we used to, in this very room where I sit right now, throw knives, throwing hatchets, and occasionally we would shoot guns at a target at the end of the room that could absorb the rounds. It turns out that just a pistol makes an incredible noise. An assault rifle will leave your ears ringing for hours unless your hearing is protected. An artillery barrage is something you'll never forget. The explosion is so loud your whole body moves just from the sound. If you're close enough, you'll feel the concussion of the explosion. It's terrifying. So these men live in constant fear. Well, for one thing, they live in constant noise and concussion and sounds, and then constant fear of being wounded or dead, even if none of those things actually happened. And it has left many men utterly paralyzed, in many cases affected for life, and that's without being hit. That's just from the threat. So I communicated to her, you got both. You did get wounded regularly, and you had to live with the constant threat that you were about to be wounded. That causes incalculable harm. And if you're listening to the sound of my voice right now, you have experienced some version of this. You have, either a little or a lot. The fact that you can't remember it means actually nothing. We are very often hurt most by the wounds we don't recall because they happened to us when we were younger. And I finished with her by saying, that's why you're still not quite willing to let go and entirely trust somebody. You're waiting for the next artillery shell to go off. You're afraid of the next shell, even if you're not being hurt right now. It's just the nature of PCSD. Next subject. A woman writes, she says, I was with my ex-husband for 15 years, and I realize now that I stayed with him far longer than I needed to because I was so afraid of being alone. I'd rather be in a lousy relationship than none. I left him almost 2 years ago and have discovered that I felt far more alone. I wouldn't have known this until I left. I felt far more alone in an empty marriage where he was there with me all the time than I have ever felt alone as a single person. I almost never feel lonely now, and I don't have a companion in the house all the time. Many of the loneliest people on earth are surrounded by crowds. Robin Williams comes to mind. He was surrounded by, dozens, hundreds, thousands of people all the time. And he was so happy he killed himself. This woman continued. Recently, I started a new job. The company is amazing, and the people are bright and humble, which is a rare combination. But the days have been busier than I could possibly have imagined, as I learn all I need to know in order to make my own contribution to the company. That's actually a very nice description, without complaining, a good description for the rest of us, of the fact that you're just dealing with a difficult job. You're not whining about it. You're saying this is tougher than you thought. You continue. I left work today feeling lonely and aware that I was going home to an empty home for the rest of the evening. For the first time in 2 years, I wanted to be coming home to a partner I could cuddle up with and just watch a movie. I genuinely thought this would fix my emptiness. I reached out to call a wise person, and I was stunned to discover that I had just got overwhelmed with how disconnected I had felt in my new job, and how in feeling that level of disconnection, I felt alone. And I thought I wanted a partner to be with. I thought that was the solution. Within minutes of connecting with this wise and loving person, I remembered how loved I am by a few very special people. I remembered how spiritually and emotionally rich my life is now, and how I have everything I need. The feeling of loneliness disappeared in an instant, and I spent the next couple of hours happily cooking dinner, listening to music, and enjoying the peace and quiet of being home. That's a really nice description. And what a lesson for everybody else and for you. It's not about being around people. It's feeling connected, which is something we can do in an instant just by remembering connection. We don't have to have somebody there. We don't have to be talking to somebody. You conclude, it was a beautiful reminder of how disconnected and lonely I used to feel all the time. How happy and fulfilling my life is now, and how when we take the time to connect with the truth, we cannot feel alone. Nice description. My wise person then suggested that I message them during the day when I'm at work to remember what's true. Just message. She might not even answer, but just my reaching out digitally enhances my connection to that person. And she was right. It worked. Every time I messaged her, whether she was busy and didn't return my text, or she wasn't and did return my text, I felt connected simply by holding out my hand. How easy it can be to forget to stop and reach out and get what we need. How could somebody read that? How could somebody hear that, like you're hearing it right now, and not feel encouraged? We have available what we need. We do. Everybody who's listening to me talk right now, you have what you need. You have an opportunity to feel connected. You could come back to this video chat and feel connected again, because what I'm doing with you right now is connecting with you. We have a choice whether we feel the connection, but the connection is there. You'll hear this phrase from some people who understand it and some people who don't, that everything is connected, that everybody is connected. Turns out that's true. Quantum physics has proven that that's true. We are all connected. Can we feel it? Can we remember it? It's choice. So we have available what we need, but usually we need to reach out in some way to find it, to feel it. We may not actually make a physical connection with somebody, but we can still feel it just by reaching out. Waiting around for other people to read our minds and connect with us doesn't work so well. So once again, it comes down to a choice that we make. We choose to feel connected. We choose to be happy. New subject. After 2 years of marriage, my partner and I went through a rocky patch a few months ago and split up. After a month, we got back together, and now we're slowly working on the issues that caused the split. I can't help but asking how you're working on the issues, because I hear this a lot. We're having a terrible time. We split up. Now we're back together, and we're working on the issues. Like how? Because you have the same tools you had before that caused the split, and now you're going to try to repair the split using the same tools. I can smash apart almost everything with my 20-pound sledgehammer, just about. But I've never succeeded in putting anything back together with it. If you're not getting significant outside help, you'll just repeat the same old stuff before long. You will. Right now, you're enjoying the newness of being back together, kind of like falling in love again. But the same stuff's going to come up, and you're going to hit another, what you call, rocky patch, and very likely split up again. Statistics actually prove this. People who get divorced, about roughly 50% of people end up getting divorced. And people who remarry get divorced about 70% of the time. People who remarry the third time get divorced at about 90% of the time. So simply finding somebody else or getting back together apparently isn't the trick. So I would ask, are you reading the book, Real Love and Marriage? Are you reading the workbook that goes along with it? Are you devouring, just sucking up the reallove.com website? There's thousands of hours of stuff there. I don't need you to do any of those things, none of which contribute to my happiness at all. And they certainly don't contribute to my making a living. What we get from members doesn't begin to cover the cost of maintaining the website. I just know from experience that trying again, in your words, or working on the issues, or worst of all, trying harder, unless you're doing something different, strikingly different, almost never works. You have to heal the old wounds. We just can't do that on our own. There's a reason that we have emergency rooms in hospitals. Because when you're in a severe accident and you're falling apart on the road, I've never seen anybody put themselves back together. We need help. I worked in emergency rooms for 6 years. Very often we need a lot of help. You continue. My partner confided in his sister about his problems, and she somehow decided that I was causing her brother's pain. How sweet of her. So she was offended. How bizarre that she's offended that you've caused her brother's pain, as though your brother was, incapacitated and you were beating him up when he was in a coma. So since then, she's been avoiding me. She plans family gatherings and doesn't invite me, for example. And it hurts to be left out like that. Family is important to me. Understandable that you would feel excluded, possibly even hurt. It never feels good to be excluded, especially by a family. So you say, what's the best way to handle this? My partner says that his sister just needs time. That's a really terrible saying, to the point almost of being stupid. Time heals all wounds. Yeah, Ask how many cancer patients just where their disorder just improved with time. No, most things fester and get bigger and they become disabling with time. You continue and say, I agree that his sister might need time. Maybe she does, as long as she's doing some of her own healing work in addition. But it still hurts when she organizes gatherings and leaves me out. So what do I do? Now, that is a good question. This is your call, how you handle this. I could give you 10 different answers to that question. How do I handle the fact that my sister-in-law leaves me out of things? 10, easily, all of which could work. So I'm not giving you the way. I'm suggesting a way. If the two of you are serious about having a real partnership, and at least you state that you are, this is an opportunity, your sister-in-law, for you to practice being partners. You don't have to. This is just a chance to. In a real partnership, the two of you would both put your relationship above all other relationships. So I would suggest that you at least consider doing this. You might say to him, I don't know his name, partner, we're just learning how to be real partners. We're pretty new at this. It's obvious that what we were doing wasn't working because recently we split up for a month. I don't want to live on the edge of a surviving partnership, living from crisis to crisis. So I'd like to be committed to being in full partnership with you all the time. And I'm asking if you would be willing to commit to being in a full partnership. Would you be willing to do that? Now, if he's serious, it's pretty hard to imagine that he would get back together with you and then say, not really. Sort of sounds like you two are interested in this. So he'll almost certainly say yes, or he wouldn't have come back. Then you could say, one of a dozen things, when you go to family functions without me, notice I'm not bringing up his sister. This is about you two. When you go to family functions without me, I hear you saying that you're putting your fear of your sister's disapproval above, meaning making it a higher priority, your desire to build the strength of our relationship. So I'm asking you if you would be willing to tell her that if I'm not invited to a gathering, then you won't be attending either. Because we're partners and we won't allow anything to separate us. I simply can't imagine somebody calling me and saying, we'd like you to come to this thing, but you need to leave Donna home because we don't like her. And me saying, oh, okay, well, I didn't want her to come anyway. My mind can't even process that sentence. So this isn't being difficult or rigid or demanding. No, this is partnership. It's just what it looks like. And by the way, he is telling you that his need for his sister's approval or fear of her disapproval, what's the difference, is more important to him than you and your pain and anything else about you for that matter. There's no other way to see it. There isn't. If you have the courage to do this, then here's what's going to happen. If you say this to him, either one, his sister will see that you two are a true partnership. She'll accept it and invite you to everything. Problem solved. Or two, she'll become angry and tell him that it's his fault, that he's abandoning his lifelong family, and she'll do it with tears running down her face or with a frown on her face or an axe in her hand or, whatever. She'll tell him that he's abandoning the family, in which case he will learn one of two things. A, that he didn't really have a relationship with her because instead of caring about him, she really cared about her own anger and control. This will confirm his decision not to go to gatherings without you because it confirms that she's just holding him hostage. Or he'll learn that he doesn't have the courage to live with her disapproval and he'll still leave you at home. Now, you will have much more valuable information about his true commitment to your relationship. Because, see, it's easy to say, oh, no, honey, you're my number one. Well, except for that and that. And I've watched people do this all the time. I say, what's the most important thing in your life? Oh, my wife. Well, except for everything else you could possibly name. And that's what he would be doing with you if he continues to go to family gatherings without you. What kind of family could he be a member of where they would require him to leave his partner at home? That's kind of nutty, really. Being a real partner takes commitment and, in this case, courage. It takes some guts to be committed to a thing. If you don't have any guts, then you don't have any real commitment. First, your commitment and courage in making the request, because it is a request, you can't make him. And then his commitment and courage in talking to his sister. How can you have a partnership when his sister is more important to him than you? You couldn't. Then she would be his partner and you'd be the, I don't know, visiting friend, the servant, the slave, the convenient companion. Is that what you want to be? I wouldn't be satisfied with that. I'm not Donna's convenient companion. I'm her partner. She's my partner. If anything gets between you, it will eventually split you apart. Yesterday, I was splitting wood, and, well, it's one of my favorite things to do. And I was splitting one great, big, massive log. And I was using a maul and wedges and my 20-pound sledge that I was just referring to. And man, I am just pounding this thing. And this great big hardwood log is just looking at me and laughing and going, is that all you got? So I just kept at it. And at one point, when I smacked a wedge with a 20-pound maul, and if you haven't ever seen a 20-pound maul hit things, they're about 2.5 times heavier than a normal sledgehammer. At one point when I hit the wedge, I heard just the slightest, just the faintest little cracking sound, and I burst into a smile. Once you've got one crack in something, well, then you can get another one, and you can widen the crack. And once I've got one crack, I can split any log apart. Well, the same is true with a marriage. If anything can get between you, his sister, kids, work, anger, controlling, pick a thing, eventually it will widen the crack and the two of you will be where you were a month ago, split up. So give it a try. Next subject. It's very common for people to say to me, I am so anxious. Like every day I hear some version of it. And I will often respond with, well, so tell me some more. Anxious about what? Then they'll tell me about an upcoming job interview, a family gathering, a musical performance where they're going to play. They say they're anxious about whatever, a thing or a person or a situation. But that's pretty vague and impersonal. Anxious about an event or a thing, the implication is that the event or the thing causes the anxiety, which is never correct. Never. Wrong. First, anxious is far too socially acceptable a word. It's just way too civilized. The correct word is fear. I am afraid. And that's what I ask people. So I say, you are afraid that what is going to happen? Because fear is always about the future. Is anybody hitting you in the head with a 20-pound sledgehammer now? No. Well, then we're not afraid about something happening now. You're afraid that what might happen. This is bolder, more accurate, more true. Next, now that we have the right word, fear, instead of anxiety, we have to understand what the next question is. Fear of what? Afraid that, for example, I've given you some examples of things people are anxious about, afraid. At the job interview, now notice I say at the job interview, not because of the job interview. So at the job interview, this is an example of being truthful. I'll start crying like a baby and look like a fool. That's what people are afraid of. No kidding. Or something like that. I'll just start babbling and confirm. Instead of having people wonder if I'm an idiot, I will open my mouth and confirm the fact. I'm afraid that when I visit my family, they'll ask me all those questions that I hate about what I'm doing. Like, well, where's your husband? Oh, or how come you're not married yet? Or are you dating yet? I can remember as a kid, have you started growing facial hair yet? Silly things. We're just afraid of being asked stupid questions. We're afraid of being interrogated, and then we'll feel like a complete loser when they look disappointed in us. I'm afraid that when I stand up to perform at the concert, I'll forget the entire piece. Anybody who's been a performer has been through this fear. I'm going to just stand up there and forget all the hours of practice, forget the first note, freeze, pee my pants in front of everybody. You think I'm making this up? No, people are that afraid of performing. And yes, they have stood up in front of an audience, forgotten, frozen, and peed their pants in front of everybody. These are personal statements. Truer, real, more in your face. Okay, and you can do something about them when you translate them even further, as though this weren't direct enough. So look, I'm afraid that at X event, a performance, a job interview, whatever it is, that make up your own, I will prove to be unlovable. I will prove to be worthless, stupid, helpless, confused, lost, whatever word you fear most. That's what I'm afraid of. Now we can do something. Now we can talk about what we do about that fear, because it's not the event. I'm afraid of the job interview. Nah, that's not true. If job interviews were inherently stressful, then everybody would be terrified of them, and not everybody is. So what's the solution? I need to find people who are not feeling unlovable and worthless, who can help me figure out what I truly am, who I truly am without my fears. Because with my fears, I have no idea who I truly am. And if I have no idea who I am, well, then everything's going to frighten me because I don't know how I'm going to respond. I don't know if I'm going to crumble. I don't know if I'm going to stand in front of the audience and pee my pants. Now, when I know who I am, when I'm filled with the love that I've always wanted, it won't matter what happens at the interview. Can you imagine? I've done this with countless hundreds of people, and I've seen this happen, so I'm not just spitballing here. When I know who I am, when I have what I want, the interview just doesn't matter. The concert, the family gathering, whatever. Now, instead of those events defining me and thereby possibly terrifying me, I use those events just as an expression of who I am, which I'm certain of. Well, now it's nothing. Kind of like this video chat. What do I have to be afraid of in this video chat? By my speaking right now. Is it going to prove that I'm worthwhile? No, because I already know that. Is it going to tell me something about who I am? Nope, I already know that. Is it going to determine whether I am loved or not loved by my partner? Nope, I already know that too. So now, knowing who I am, I'm completely free to simply express who I am as I speak to you. And there's zero fear in that. None. So no matter how the event turns out, I will still have what matters. I'll still feel loved. I'll still feel worthwhile. I'll know who I am. Now, talking about my fear is worthwhile. when I understand that that's what I'm really afraid of. Not knowing who I am, feeling worthless, stupid, unlovable, all those things that I listed. Much more beneficial to talk about specific fear, the real fears, instead of just, I'm anxious, which is kind of a no-yield, vague, nothing thing to talk about. New subject. I don't know what overcame me, but I keep files on lots of subjects. Like, I don't know, I probably have 30,000 files on different subjects on my computer. And one day I was going through some of these files and came across a bunch of quotes from various places on the subject of fear. And so I edited them. And some of these are just moving. First quote. If you want to conquer fear, don't sit home and think about it. Go out and get busy. Dale Carnegie. Another. It's not the busyness. It's the action predicated on faith. Busyness means nothing, in other words. It's action predicated on faith. Faith is the antidote to fear. Unknown author. John Berryman said, we have to travel in the direction of our fear. He's saying, if you run, you confirm, if you run away from what you're afraid of, you confirm that your fears were real and you stay afraid. Thomas Carlyle. The first duty for a man is still that of subduing fear. We must get rid of fear. We cannot act at all until we do. He's saying fear paralyzes, and we've talked about that many times. And once you're paralyzed, you can't take any action at all, and then you confirm that you are a worthless, can't do anything person, and that just multiplies the fear. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he has not learned the lesson of life who does not every day surmount a fear. If you're not facing a fear, you're not growing. That's what he's saying. Another quote. Only when we walk through our fears do we discover that mostly they were illusions. I like this one, so I'm going to say it again. Only when we walk through our fears, after we walk through them, do we discover that mostly they were illusions. Another way to say that is until we walk through them. While we sit in them and then move through them, only then can we learn they're illusions. If we sit in them, they seem very real. On the other side, they don't. Requires faith, requires motion. Brendan Francis said, many of our fears are tissue paper thin, and a single courageous step would carry us clear through them. It's another way of saying the quote before that. Here's another. As we face our own fears, we give others the courage to face theirs. How many times in my life have I seen a group of people face a difficult prospect, a difficult perspective, a difficult task, and one person has the courage to take the first step forward and the entire crowd moves? It was 1492. So we're talking about who knows how many thousand years of people being alive on Earth. And yeah, there were probably some expeditions before that we don't know about. But before Columbus decides, I'm going to pass the point of no return, which means the place in the ocean where if you keep going, you don't have enough supplies to get back. And he reaches the New World. After he took the step of reaching the New World, how many people followed him within the next 50 years? Thousands. Somebody had to take the first step. And last, Eleanor Roosevelt. You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You could summarize all these. If you don't deal with fear, you're dead. If you do, you grow. You really could. New subject. I know a woman who has integrated real love beautifully into her life. So have her 2 daughters. It's a lovely thing to watch. Her husband, Jack, pretty much just sits on the sidelines, doing nothing, preferring just to enjoy the fact that there is increased love in his home because of his wife and his 2 daughters. He's what I would call a passive beneficiary. So doesn't read books, doesn't go on group, doesn't talk about real love ever, but it's obvious that he's really enjoying his family more. She spoke to me. She said, today I dealt poorly with a situation with Jack, her husband. I said, well, you're actually just learning. You're seeing things in your feelings and behavior that you just didn't find remarkable in the past. You wouldn't have in the past seen that you dealt poorly with Jack. You would have called that average. You might have even called it a good day. She continues, I noticed a week ago some strange looking growing things. I can't look her in the eye, but out of the corner of my eye, I can just feel Donna cringing. I noticed some strange looking growing things in the cat food. Creepy. I told Jack about them, and I thought that they might be fly eggs or larvae, and suggested that we give the cats dry biscuits in the morning and wet food in the evening to reduce the amount of time that the food was left out for flies to settle. You have to leave wet food out for a while before you get larvae. They don't just pop up in a couple of hours, just saying. He agreed. So today he fed the cats. In the evening, I noticed that there was an odd smell in the cat's room. Apparently Jack is a slow learner. So there was an odd smell, and when I checked, there was old wet food with, again, growing things, and new wet food and biscuits just all sort of mixed together. You can just see Jack doing this, right? Here's the wet, nasty food, and instead of scooping it out and cleaning out the bowl, he just goes, well, let's see. If you add dry food to wet food, then it all becomes dry food. So she says, so here I go on the field of death, and she asks this in the form of a question. I showed Jack the growing things in the food, and I asked him, what did he think they were? I've heard so many of these conversations. The results of them were predictably humorous, to me at least. He shrugged his shoulders and said, I have no idea, reminding you very much of saying to a child who's been told not to take any cookies out of the cookie jar, and he has chocolate smeared all over his face, and you say, so have you been eating anything? No. Here's an adult man doing the same thing. He really hates being wrong. He lives in a safe little world in his head. So if he admits being wrong, the world just isn't orderly for him anymore, and he can't have that. In addition to the fact that he would be admitting a mistake and would be flawed. You say, I reminded him that I think that they're fly eggs, and I asked him if he'd given the cats wet food in the morning and mixed it with fresh wet food in the evening, and he said that he couldn't remember if he fed them wet food in the morning, and he hadn't seen the growing things. I'll bet. His world is orderly and controlled. It's how he protects himself from the pain of the past and the present. If you intrude into his protected little world, he hates that. See, because in his world, he's doing all the right things and everything's okay. It's threatening to him for you to tell him that something's wrong in his orderly little world, whether you're actually attacking him or not. Now, of course, if you are actually attacking him with your tone, his response will be much worse. You say, I felt his irritation. He, without doubt, felt me attacking him, and he felt criticized, and he felt controlled. I'm sure he did. I felt ignored, not listened to, invisible, and irritated by his lack of responsibility. You're getting pretty close. His lack of responsibility was only part of the problem. a small part, actually. What you were irritated by most was that in the process of the cat food problem, issue number 1, and the discussion of the cat food, which is a second issue, he ignored you. He ignored what you wanted. He made it about the food and whether he could remember whether he put in dry or wet, or whether it was flies or fish larvae, whatever. He dismissed you, and you hate that. He didn't care about you. And you are finally not accepting that, being dismissed and not cared about, as all right. It's not okay with you anymore. Actually, I'm kind of happy for you that you're not accepting this as normal, because you've been dismissed, condescended to, and ignored for, well, your whole life, much like a lady that we talked about earlier in the video chat. So yes, you're irritated, which never makes anybody happy, but you're not accepting the way that things have been for decades, being ignored. And that's actually pretty good. You say, sanity kicked in, and I chose to just leave the room. He came and found me, gave me a cuddle, and said, what's the point of arguing about the cat food? And I said I really appreciated him coming to find me. That's somewhat amazing that Jack would come to find you. I did not expect to read that next. You continue. You conclude, actually. This morning we were chatting about real love and our children, and I asked him if he was willing to talk about the cat food episode yesterday. Well, bless you and your courage. Amazing. Neither of us attacked the other. I told him that I had made a mistake in blaming him rather than being simply factual about the situation, that there are moving things in the food, and to lovingly find a solution instead of sticking with blaming. Since he has nothing to do with real love, I'm grateful that he simply does his best to understand and change the way he does some things, and to make loving me a priority enough to change some of those things. No kidding. He's actually starting to pay attention. He has seen the changes in you and in the kids, and he recognizes that you're all happier and stronger. He's not stupid. He doesn't quite have the whole picture, but he's smart enough to recognize that he doesn't want to be left out of this, well, happy revolution. This is getting to be fun. Here's somebody who said, oh, actually, it's not somebody, it's me. I was writing a note to myself. Recently, for reasons I couldn't identify at the time, I just acquired a foul mood. I just wasn't happy. It just was internally not peaceful. Sometimes you don't always discover the reason why. So I just wasn't feeling happy. I wasn't remembering that I was loved. I wasn't remembering the eternal nature of life. I wish I could tell you this was 20 years ago, but this was like last week. I was feeling burdened by an endless list of tasks that needed to be done. Hearing critical voices, whatever, pick your reason for being in a foul mood. And I came up with, it was very well reasoned, I came up with a perfectly justified reason to blame Donna for my mood. Well reasoned, articulate, brilliant. I was thinking about how to tell her that she was responsible for how I felt. And then I remembered some fool who had talked on a video chat about what you do if you find yourself in a heightened emotional state, especially if it's fear or anger or blaming or running, any kind of protecting. And this fool, the one who's talking to you now, said to pause and don't speak. Instead, ask what is really happening. How do you feel? How do you want to feel? You want to keep feeling like you do, or do you want to do something about it so you feel like you really want? Then I remembered that I was the fool who'd said that. I considered the source and got over that part and did just what had been suggested. I paused. How do you feel? What are you doing? How do you want to feel? And I realized that my negative feelings far exceeded anything happening in real time, which is the definition of PCSD. Something just grabbed hold of my brain. Don't know how, don't know why, don't care. It's the pause that matters. I chose not to continue feeling that way. It couldn't possibly go anywhere good. So I paused. I shut up. The feelings did go away. I can't even remember remotely. What I had beautifully reasoned was all Donna's fault. I can tell you I was really glad that I paused. Later in the day, I said, earlier today, I had come up with a reason to be disagreeable. Without a shred of a pause, she said, I know. Apparently, even the pause wasn't perfect. Way better to pause when we feel bad than continue on a course that we know is going to end badly. I still make these mistakes. I still do. You still will. And all we need to do is stop, not speak. Remember what's true. Remember how we want to feel. And then we can begin to make choices to arrive at the more positive feeling. We can all do this. And the ways to do it and the truths that we use to get there are found in the real love literature everywhere, in books, in video chats, in daily coaching sessions. It's all out there. All we have to do is reach out, find it, understand it, learn it, remember it, and sometimes connect with other people who will remind us of these things. It works consistently. We'll see you in a week.